One morning in September 2019, police showed up at a quiet home in Pennsylvania to check on someone who hadn't been answering calls. From the outside, everything looked normal. Windows closed, curtains drawn, but no one came to the door. When officers went inside, what they found was deeply unsettling. Blood on the floors, stained towels, and signs that something violent had happened. Upstairs, they walked into a scene that was far worse than they expected, one that left them shaken and full of questions. Whatever had taken place in that house wasn't just sudden or random. It looked planned and personal. Margaret was born on June 28, 1958, in Pennsylvania. Her childhood unfolded in the heart of her family's dance studio, a vibrant hub of creativity cherished by locals. The studio wasn't just a workplace, it was a second home. Margaret eventually became a ballet instructor, helping run the studio and organizing cherished Christmas performances that became a local tradition. Her warmth and energy left an impression on everyone she met. She had a magnetic personality, always poised, always well put together. Though life had its hardships, Margaret carried herself with resolve and purpose. Early in adulthood, she married John Joseph Thierry. The relationship, however, soon unraveled due to John's emotional absence and lack of responsibility. After their divorce, Margaret became a single mother to two daughters, Helen and Peg. With no support from their father, she took on the full weight of parenting while continuing to work at the studio. Despite the obstacles, she created a loving and disciplined environment for her daughters. Years later, Margaret met David Lee Sumney, a charismatic dentist and Harvard graduate. His charm and apparent devotion offered Margaret the stability she had longed for. They married in 1986 and built a life marked by financial security and domestic comfort in a well-appointed Pennsylvania home. In 1989, they welcomed a son, David Lee Sumney Jr. David Sr. played an active role in raising Jr., and his bond with Helen and Peg also grew strong. Their blended family seemed from the outside to be thriving, but inside the home, a different story unfolded. David Jr. grew up without limits. From an early age, his every desire was fulfilled instantly. Toys, vacations, and indulgences were granted without question. Over time, he shifted from asking to demanding, learning to manipulate those around him to get what he wanted. Even routine tasks became negotiable, and he refused to comply without some form of reward. Gratitude and responsibility held no value for him, only personal gain. One deeply troubling incident involved a bird he found in the backyard. He squeezed it so tightly that it died. Margaret, horrified by the lack of remorse on her son's face, nervously joked to relatives that he acted like a future criminal. But beneath the humor was genuine alarm. David Jr. lacked empathy and showed no guilt, and with no intervention, those disturbing traits hardened as he grew. By 2001, Margaret and David Sr.'s marriage had quietly collapsed. Their divorce, though not contentious, marked the end of the stability Margaret had worked so hard to build. The family's financial structure fell apart. David Sr.'s support stopped, and the dance studio, once the family's cornerstone, was no longer sustainable. Margaret was forced to shut it down. Left with minimal resources, she took a job at a clothing store to cover basic expenses. The work was humble, but necessary. Meanwhile, David Jr.'s sense of entitlement only grew stronger. Despite the family's reduced circumstances, he continued to expect special treatment. His behavior never changed. Despite his own financial troubles, David Sr. continued to support Jr. at great personal cost. He rationalized this as a way to preserve their fragile relationship, often yielding to his son's every whim. The couple no longer shared a home, but emotionally, they remained tethered, caught in a pattern of submission dictated by Jr.'s unpredictable moods. He moved between both households freely, manipulating their desire for peace and affection to his advantage. As the years passed, the power Jr. held over his parents only intensified. Even as their financial situations declined and their lives became more unstable, neither parent changed course. The household dynamic had fully shifted. Their world now revolved around managing their son's emotions and minimizing his outbursts. In 2008, at the age of 19, David Jr. enrolled at George Washington University to study mathematics. His parents, despite years of hardship, saw a glimmer of hope. They believed that higher education and a structured environment might finally redirect his behavior. The costs were steep: housing, tuition, and daily expenses. But Margaret and David Sr. bore the burden together. In 2010, Margaret traveled to Washington, D.C. to visit her son. What followed raised unsettling questions. Margaret called her daughter Helen from a hospital, claiming Jr. had tried to harm himself with a knife, and she had fallen during the ordeal, injuring her head. But Margaret's story didn't add up. She was evasive, vague, and defensive. When Helen arrived, she found her mother and brother housed in separate hospital rooms, an odd decision that no one could fully explain. Medical staff withheld details. Helen began to suspect that her brother's violent tendencies had escalated again, this time possibly against their mother. But no investigation was ever opened. The matter was dropped, officially unexamined. Shortly after this disturbing event, David Jr. was expelled from the university. The reasons were clear: chronic absenteeism, aggressive altercations, and repeated violations of campus rules. The incident devastated his parents. All their efforts, emotional, financial, and psychological, had resulted in yet another failure. Once again, Jr. returned home to Pennsylvania, alternating between both parents' homes, showing no signs of reform. In July 2015, Jr., now 26, reached a new low. He was unemployed, unmotivated, and still entirely reliant on his parents. When he asked his father for a large sum of money to fund a vacation and was refused, the situation escalated into violence. Jr. physically attacked David Sr., beating him brutally in their home. Neighbors, alarmed by the chaos, called for help. Police arrived to find Jr. still on top of his father, delivering blows. David Sr.'s injuries were catastrophic. Doctors diagnosed brain hemorrhaging, spinal trauma, and severe internal damage. He was left unable to walk or care for himself and had to be moved to a long-term nursing facility. Jr. was arrested at the scene and charged with aggravated assault, not attempted murder, as many in the family believed he should have been. He was released shortly after posting bond. The man he had nearly killed could no longer speak for himself. Despite the brutal attack, Jr. faced few consequences. With little legal resistance and a family too broken to fight back, he walked free, unchanged, unrepentant, and more emboldened than ever. In the aftermath, he began telling those around him that he had joined the U.S. Navy. The story seemed like a strange twist, but Margaret clung to it. For her, military service offered the illusion of hope, a structured, disciplined path that might rescue her son from his own darkness. But there was no record of any enlistment. He presented no documents, wore no uniform, and dodged questions about his supposed service. Every inquiry led to vague, unverifiable answers. Meanwhile, Junior began transforming himself physically. He took up strength training with obsessive focus, gaining significant muscle mass in a short span of time. Now standing close to 6.5 feet tall and heavily built, his appearance became as threatening as his behavior. As his physical power grew, so did his aggression. Junior became more volatile and unpredictable. Conversations with him were laced with hostility, veiled threats, and blatant attempts to dominate those around him. He made it clear, subtly or directly, that resistance would be met with force. Margaret, worn down by years of fear, confusion, and love, remained at his side, still hoping the son she had raised might someday return to the boy she thought she knew. But by then, control was no longer something Margaret or anyone in the family had. Junior was no longer just difficult or entitled. He had become dangerous, and no one seemed able or willing to stop him. Then, in November of 2016, Margaret's home became the scene of another horrifying episode. Late at night, Junior, heavily intoxicated, crept into her bedroom and began to strangle her in her sleep. The attack was silent and brutal. Given his sheer size and strength, Margaret had little chance to resist. Gasping for air, she managed to break free and scream. Junior withdrew without explanation and went back to his room. Margaret called the police. When officers arrived, they found Junior asleep and reeking of alcohol. Margaret had bruises and finger marks on her neck and ribs. She told the officers what had happened, adding that Junior mentioned using a Marine Corps technique, a chilling claim that reignited skepticism about his military story. Junior was arrested, and the incident was documented as a case of domestic violence with aggravating circumstances. But once again, Margaret intervened. Fearing that a felony charge would ruin her son's future, she urged prosecutors to reduce the severity of the charges. She claimed he had acted under the influence and needed help, not prison time. She leaned on the idea, still unproven, that Junior had served in the U.S. Navy, presenting it as evidence of his potential. Her plea persuaded the court. The felony was reduced to a lesser administrative charge, and Junior avoided serious punishment. During court proceedings, an official background check exposed the truth. David Jr. had never served in any branch of the military. The story he had told for years was a complete fabrication. There was no record of recruitment, enlistment, or training. His military persona had been a calculated lie to mask his failures and violent tendencies. Still, Margaret clung to the belief that her son could change. Junior was sentenced to 16 months, his first real consequence. While incarcerated, he presented himself as a man battling addiction rather than aggression. He claimed alcohol was the root of his problems, not a lack of empathy or violent impulse. The strategy worked. One social worker advocated for his transfer to a rehabilitation facility instead of prison. The court approved. At the Pennsylvania Recovery Center, Junior was placed under structured supervision. He joined therapy sessions and group activities. Margaret visited often, bringing supplies and continuing to defend her son. For her, the rehabilitation signaled a possible turning point. If he could complete the program, maybe the worst was over. Upon finishing treatment, Junior entered transitional housing and quickly found work. According to progress reports, he followed the rules and showed signs of adjustment. To outsiders and to a hopeful family, he seemed reformed. But this appearance was only surface deep. Beneath the good behavior lay the same manipulative core. Junior never took true responsibility for his past, never expressed real remorse, and never acknowledged the pain he caused. By 2018, the carefully constructed mask David Lee Sumney Jr. wore was beginning to crack, but not fast enough for the system to respond. That August, his father, David Lee Sumney Sr., died at the age of 74 in a Pennsylvania nursing home. Officially, no cause of death was listed beyond age-related complications. But to those who knew the family's history, the true catalyst had been clear for years. The brutal 2015 beating David Sr. had suffered at the hands of his own son. That violent attack left him with brain damage, spinal trauma, and permanent physical disabilities. He lost his independence, his ability to work, and his dignity. The decline was steady and irreversible. Though no one in the family spoke openly about it, there was a shared understanding that Junior's assault had destroyed the man David Sr. once was. And yet, Junior remained free, untouched by further charges, and unburdened by guilt. At the funeral, Margaret stood composed, never speaking a word against her son. Her silence deepened rifts within the family. Her family struggled to understand how she could continue to shield the person responsible for such devastation. For them, this wasn't just a tragedy, it was a systemic failure. Law enforcement had acted too late. The courts had been too lenient. And Margaret's protective instincts had, in their view, allowed a dangerous man to keep harming others. In 2019, Junior entered a new relationship through a dating app. The woman, who later chose to remain anonymous for her safety, moved in with him soon after they met. Initially, Junior seemed transformed, charming, respectful, and attentive. But the illusion didn't last. He soon became controlling and aggressive, monitoring her movements and enforcing rigid rules inside the home. The woman noticed something unsettling. Junior was using checks written in Margaret's name. He claimed his mother suffered from mental health issues and that he was managing her bills, forging her signature when needed. But there was no legal documentation, no power of attorney, no court order supporting this. When his partner raised concerns, he deflected with excuses about paperwork delays. Though she suspected fraud, she lacked the proof to involve authorities. As their relationship deteriorated and she prepared to leave, Junior reacted with fury. Determined not to be rejected, he coerced her into meeting him at a hotel in Atlantic City. Once there, he turned violent. Over the course of several days, she was beaten, strangled into unconsciousness multiple times, and held captive without access to help. At one point, Junior believed he had killed her and fled the room. She remained motionless and injured until a concerned hotel housekeeper, alarmed by the prolonged "Do Not Disturb" sign, entered the room. The woman was found alive, but just barely. She was rushed to the hospital, and police launched an investigation. An arrest warrant for Junior was issued on July 16, 2019. But due to a critical error, the warrant was never uploaded to the federal database. This administrative failure allowed Junior to return to Pennsylvania without being flagged as a fugitive. Days later, he was picked up on unrelated charges, but because his warrant hadn't been entered into the system, he was released without consequence. The woman's assault had slipped through the cracks of a system meant to protect her. This moment, this failure of communication between agencies, would have devastating consequences. Only weeks later, on September 1, 2019, the Margaret's family would suffer yet another, even more horrific loss. And this time, there would be no more warnings left to ignore. That day, John, Margaret Sumney's brother, had passed away. As the news spread among relatives, efforts were made to coordinate the funeral. One of John's sisters attempted to contact Margaret several times, but her calls went unanswered. Concerned, she reached out to Margaret's eldest daughter, Helen, who also tried to get in touch, with no success. By the morning of September 2nd, growing anxious, Helen persisted. Eventually, her brother answered the phone. He claimed Margaret was asleep and refused to put her on the line. His voice was flat, evasive, and dismissive. Sensing something was deeply wrong, the family contacted local authorities and requested a welfare check. When officers arrived at Margaret's home, everything seemed still. The windows were shut. No one responded. After a few minutes of silence, police forced entry and immediately sensed that something terrible had taken place. A foul odor filled the air. Bloodstains trailed across multiple rooms. Drag marks and stained towels revealed efforts to clean up or conceal the scene. Upstairs, they found Margaret in the bathtub. She had been dead for over 24 hours. Her body showed multiple blunt force injuries, especially around the head and neck. Blood covered the walls and floors. In the hallway, investigators found a sickle stained with what appeared to be blood. A revolver registered to Margaret was missing. Only its empty ammunition box remained. Forensic experts meticulously combed through the scene. The amount of blood, the cleanup attempts, and the strategic positioning of items throughout the house suggested not only brutality, but calculation. This wasn't a frenzied or impulsive killing. It was prolonged and deliberate. The most chilling evidence came from a digital device. Among Junior's belongings was a laptop and an external hard drive. On it, police discovered 277 photos taken in the aftermath of the killing. Some showed Margaret's body staged in various positions. Others were selfies, Junior posing with his mother's lifeless body, expressionless, or even smug. Lighting had been adjusted, angles arranged. The timestamps revealed the process had unfolded over hours. Alongside the photos, his browsing history offered damning insight. He had searched how to clean blood from surfaces, how human bodies decompose, and methods to avoid detection in residential settings. He had looked up chemical odor neutralizers and even the science behind mummification. Junior had not panicked. He had prepared. The brutality of the crime and the calculated nature of the aftermath formed a psychological portrait of someone without conscience, remorse, or restraint. Investigators had no doubt who was responsible, but the challenge was capturing him. Police turned to the one person still in occasional contact, Helen. They asked her to help set a trap. She agreed, and invited Junior to attend their Uncle John's funeral, knowing he might show up. When he did, officers were waiting. He was arrested on the spot. Among his possessions were Margaret's checks and pieces of her jewelry. He was formally charged with third-degree murder, abuse of a corpse, theft, and related crimes. A psychiatric evaluation declared him competent to stand trial. In August 2022, Junior took a plea deal. He admitted guilt and was sentenced to 20 to 40 years in prison. With time served, he'll be eligible for parole in 2039, around his 50th birthday. To Margaret's surviving relatives, the outcome was a betrayal. The horror of the crime, the photographic documentation, the forensic evidence, the digital trail should have warranted a harsher charge. Her daughters and sisters spoke publicly, condemning the deal and calling the sentence inadequate. In court, Junior gave a brief statement. He apologized and claimed he didn't understand how he could have done what he did. His words rang hollow. For the family, this wasn't an act of madness. It was the final result of a lifetime without limits, one marked by manipulation, abuse, and warning signs ignored or dismissed. Margaret Sumney's story ended not with a sudden tragedy, but with a long, preventable descent. She was killed not by a stranger, but by the child she had always defended. In just 2 days, the family lost both John and Margaret, but in truth, they had lost Junior years before. Helen has severed all ties with her brother. The man she once called family now lives as a convicted murderer. What remains is not just grief, but the heavy weight of what could have been prevented.
Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations.